My sister's boyfriend is a werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I know that you won't believe me, but this happened to me personally the other evening as sunset ended. I was in the woods behind my family's house, a couple of minutes walk into the trees, and I was enjoying watching the light get darker and darker. I know it's unsafe to be in the woods at night, but I grew up in this house and I've never encountered anything bigger than a stray house cat in those backwoods. I should say I never did before this night I'm telling you about, at least. I was walking on a narrow dirt path and entertaining lazy thoughts about going home soon when the crashing of leaves somewhere in front of me captured all of my attention. For the first time I can ever remember, I felt frightened in that small forest behind my family home. It seemed like an irrational fear at the time, but I ducked behind a large tree and peeked out, even as I felt stupid doing so. It was probably one of my neighbors. I had run into neighbors in those woods more times than I could count on one hand, and I never felt frightened when any of them approached. I began thinking about possibly jumping out and shouting boo when I saw whoever it was. Except that I never saw who it was. I saw what it was. A savage-looking mess of a thing, that's what it was. Something down on all fours, yet still standing 5.5 or 6 feet tall at the shoulder by my estimate. It was barreling through the undergrowth at a rate twice that of any human being, and yet I got the impression that the thing wasn't at all in any kind of a hurry. And then, suddenly, it stopped short, and it tensed up. I saw it move its head around, sniffing the air and moving its tall, thin ears around on the top of its head, like it was using them for echolocation or something. I felt a cold breeze at my back blowing the smell of my fear directly into the thing's nostrils. He was using all his senses to triangulate my position, and it was only a matter of time until he was going to roust me out. I shivered all over. I didn't know what that thing would do to me once it found me, and I thought about making a run for it back to the house. That was when fate sort of decided things for me, as I watched while that creature leaned back and stood up on its hind legs. Imagine a werewolf, but in real life. That was what I felt like I was seeing. Its front paws were like monster claws, not dog paws. The fur was long and wavy, colored this very unique orangey-reddish color with lighter streaks running through it around the edges. It was unforgettable looking, with its very beautiful but very conspicuous markings. Certainly if this creature wanted to be camouflaged, he'd need to stay near autumn leaves, as nothing else in nature is ever so brightly orange and red as this upright, wide-chested dog or dogman was. I felt like I was looking at a special effects movie, but one of the older ones where it's all practical effects. This didn't look like it was generated in a computer. It looked like some kind of giant Jim Henson puppet from hell, towering probably over 10 feet tall, surveying the area, trying to sniff me out. The problem with this description, though, is that a puppet that large would need multiple puppeteers, and it would need to move a little on the slow side. This giant upright dog thing moved fast, sort of like it had too much coffee for breakfast or something. It looked around fast. It moved its ears fast. It sniffed the air and it panted fast. And I knew that if I ran away, it would run after me fast as well. But it was either that, or wait for him to come get me. So I decided to take the squirrel path back. Squirrel Path was a smaller, narrower, shorter path back that required crawling at points and squeezing through some closely packed trees. My sister and I used to race each other in timed races when we were younger. Take the main path to the crooked tree, then come back on the squirrel path. If I was lucky, I could scoot through there in places too small for the dogman to fit, and if I was unlucky, then I'd get stuck somewhere and be easy pickings for the dogman. I counted down in my head 3, 2, 1, run. As soon as I took off, the dogman emitted a high-pitched, nervous, and angry sort of barking, and I could hear the giant thing racing after me. I ran that natural obstacle course like I had never run it in my life, and it sounded as though the dogman were getting further and further away from me. When I came up behind the house, though, I saw the dogman already emerging from the bushes in front of me to the right on the main path. I was too late. He was going to be able to cut me off, and I was too exhausted to run any further. I held onto a tree and braced for impact, my eyes tearing up, because I was feeling pretty emotional. But the dogman surprised me. Instead of turning left and nabbing me, he raced around the right side of the house, disappearing from view on the other side, and apparently heading out toward the sidewalk in the front of the house. I wanted to drop to the floor and faint in relief, but curiosity kept me moving toward the house, heading in the back door, with the intent of looking out the front windows to see if I could see where the dogman went. Once I got inside, though, I saw my sister introducing my parents to an individual I had never seen before in my life. Or had I? There was a very tall young gentleman there, a rugged-looking individual. The guy had long, wavy, bright orange hair with lighter-colored streaks in it. My knees almost gave out when I made the connection, and I retreated out of the house before the guy could see me. I stood out back, thinking for a while. Seriously, WTH is about all my brain could give back to me, though. I went and hid around the side of the house behind a bush with a view of the front door. I wondered, if that guy was the dogman, the werewolf, was he going to attack my family? Should I call the police on my cell? If so, what should I tell them, that I think my sister invited a werewolf over? I really didn't know what I should do, but I knew I was really scared that streaky dude was going to turn back into the wolfman while inside my house. I was shaking all over. I was genuinely terrified and confused. When the front door opened, I was somewhat relieved to see polite smiles on everyone's faces. Where was this guy going to take my sister for their date? Was he going to throw her on his back and race off on all fours? He had gotten there through the woods. I saw him. I watched as my parents waved and the two of them hopped on the Harley that had been parked out front all morning. I presume he drove it there earlier and left it? I had seen the bike there since breakfast, and I know it had never been parked on our block before. We're the only house on that block, so it's extremely rare to see a Harley parked out front. Nevertheless, I seemed to have been the only one who took mental note of the motorcycle for some reason. I watched the two of them drive off, and it left a bad taste in my mouth. I usually get along with my sister's boyfriends, but this guy just chased me through the woods and had me convinced I was a goner. I can't imagine that my sister isn't in serious danger hanging around this guy. If I said that to her, I'm sure it would only make her like the guy better. If she gets harmed or worse, though, I could never forgive myself. So I wish I knew what to do about the fact that my sister's boyfriend is a werewolf. Don't go anywhere. We've got a second Wintertime Dogman story in a minute, but first please allow me to deeply thank a very kind gentleman named Timothy Walker, our executive producer for tonight's episode. Our executive producer is Timothy Walker. He heats the room like Betty Crocker. He's more OG than Knickerbockers because Mr. Walker is a real punk rocker. Please join me in thanking Timothy Walker, who recently upgraded to our $10 level channel membership. He's so cool, he already got to see this episode yesterday. And you could too if you join our $10 level by clicking the join link under this video. Thanks, Tim. We really appreciate it. And now, here's that second Wintertime Dogman story I promised you. And this one is called Dogman and the Icy Day. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I went for a walk alone in nature, which is something I don't think I'd ever do again. I got my ankles stuck in some ice, and I couldn't get away when I got sighted and approached by a dogman. This story happened in Superior National Forest, up about as north as you can go in Minnesota without becoming a Canadian. It was late December in 2012, and I was camping in the snow with my crazy camping buddy that we can call Bluto. Although he's calmed down a bit more recently since he got married, Bluto was, when we first met, a real-life version of the John Belushi character in Animal House. He was chubby and round, but insane and manic. He could outrun me, and even though I'm taller and I work out, I'm pretty sure he could take me in a fight, even these days. It was always a lot of fun hanging around with him, but I would also need breaks, and it was on one of my Bluto breaks that I nearly lost my life to the North American upright walking canid, or dogman. I remember it was so peaceful walking in the snow that evening that I began to feel at home out there in the wilderness. That's very unwise. The wilderness is not my home. And so I got careless, walking while looking off in the distance and admiring the view, instead of watching where I was placing my boots. I slid off a sheet of ice I should have seen, and I slid sideways down an incline, screaming because I thought I was going to fall 100 feet or more. It was only around an 8 or 9 foot drop as I fell into a tiny little ravine and landed hard on more ice underneath me, which shattered, lowering me suddenly about another 8 or 9 inches. It was like, bump, bump, oops. I was so relieved not to be plummeting to a horrible demise that I started laughing at myself for screaming. I reached up and I could feel the root of a large and solid tree. I'd be able to pull myself up out of that hole no problem. Relaxing, I resolved to catch my breath and wait until my heart stopped beating so hard. I was stuck in an icy hole a foot or so over my head, feeling stupid and ridiculous, but otherwise fine. When I was ready, I reached up, grabbed that big old root, and began pulling myself up, only to have my attempt thwarted by an icy stabbing pain in my right ankle. Giving up, I squatted straight down as there really wasn't room to bend over. It was hard to see from my angle, but my hands confirmed that my right foot had fallen through some ice, and the way the fallen ice had collapsed around my ankle, I was unable to lift my foot back out. This was a scary situation to be sure, but at that point, I was still mostly feeling embarrassed for having been so out of it that I got myself into this stupid situation. I started pressing my hands against the ice to try to move it. That wasn't happening, but I noticed my hands were getting wet, which had to mean that the ice was melting due to the warmth of my ankle and my hands. I had no choice but to try to melt enough of the ice away that my foot could come free. Then it would be easy to climb out. I discovered that my hands were freezing up faster than the ice was melting, and I had to stick my hands in my pants repeatedly to warm them up again. I was feeling stupider and stupider, but I still wasn't thinking that this was the end of me. Squatting down in the hole, trying to melt the ice around my ankle with my bare hands, I began to hear this sort of Darth Vader kind of sound up above me. Like a really heavy, raspy breathing. It sounded like a really big guy with asthma who was sort of panting loudly. The sound got louder and louder, and I thought it might be my buddy Bluto, so I called out his name. I heard a shuffling sound as whoever it was came closer quickly, and soon I looked up to see a big, old, giant dog head looking down at me, with drool landing all over my face from way up there, about 5, 6, 7 feet above me. Again, I laughed in relief, thinking that there was no reason to be afraid. After all, it was just a big old pooch. I stood up quickly, reaching up to pet the head of the dog, and also to warm my hands on him while I was at it. As I rose up, I saw the dog's expression change drastically. Rather than reaching up and petting his head, that dog head rose up into the air faster than my hand rose to greet it. The unexpectedness of this took my breath away. At first I thought I was seeing someone tall grabbing the dog by its collar and lifting it up quickly. This dog wasn't wearing any collar, though. The lips curled back, and that dog, standing there on its hind legs, began barking at me in this furiously angry way, with growling in between each bark. My eyes refocused on him, looking at him all over again. This time, I wasn't seeing him as a dog. This seemed like a wild animal, something more wolf than pooch. Also, it was reared upright as it barked at me, looking downward. I had made it feel threatened when I reached out to touch it, and it had stood up in response. Now I was prey, trapped in a hole. Prey that had gotten the predator frightened and upset. My blushing intensified, but this time it wasn't because I was worried about Bluto making fun of me. This time it was because I realized I might be about to make my curtain call, because of my own carelessness and stupidity. Each time the upright wolf barked at me, it felt almost like being hit from above. That's how percussive his shouting was. It was like being scolded before being eaten for dinner. I was crying and wishing for him to get it over with. But then I realized the dogman was probably waiting for me to climb up. There wasn't really room for him to jump down with me. He might have been able to reach me with his long front legs, but he wasn't thinking like a man. He was thinking like an upright walking wolf. He wanted to snap at me with his jaws. That's what his instincts told him was right. At least that's what I was hoping. I felt kind of in a mild shock. Between that and the ice, I was shivering all over. As soon as I saw that dog rear up, it felt like all the blood had drained from my body. I was ice cold everywhere but my flushed cheeks and forehead. After a while, I gave up on the ice around my ankle and worked on warming my fingers back up instead. The dog barked and growled, and growl barked, and bark growled over me, causing me physical pain and a mounting headache. I remembered one time when I stayed at my cousin's place in Brooklyn for a month, and almost every day this one car alarm would go off and keep going off for an hour. Maybe it wasn't a car, but it was some kind of an alarm, and it was loud. It drove me crazy when I got there, and it made it hard for me to get my work done. By the time I left, though, I had worked out a way to block it out using meditation. I tried using the same technique to relax myself and endure the loud and angry monster a few feet above me. It worked to some extent, but a car alarm doesn't have fangs the size of the ones that heinous beast above me that night did. I went from attempted meditation to attempted praying as I became more and more convinced that I wasn't going to get out of this in one piece. Even if the dogman went away, I might get frostbite. I might pass away from exposure to the elements. Maybe I'd starve to death. Maybe they'd never find me in my little hidey hole, even if the dogman left me alone. But the dogman wasn't leaving me alone. It kept shouting and moaning and whining and growling at me relentlessly. And then I heard a sound even more feral and crazy than the most insane dogman. I heard some kind of a caveman screaming, and I looked up to see that dogman looking scared for about 1/20th of a second before he split. I could hear the thing running away loudly, and I could hear the screaming caveman monster sound getting closer. I'll tell you, I thought I was witnessing a dogman being chased off by a Bigfoot, because that's what it sounded like. I wasn't far off, though. It was my friend Bluto. He was absolutely plastered, and he was laughing his butt off. I could barely understand what he was saying, but I don't think he understood that he just chased off a real dogman. He kept shouting after the monster, calling him a freak and a pervert and a cosplayer. So I don't really know what he was seeing through his beer goggles that night. All I know is that he thought it was hysterical that my foot was stuck in ice and that I was in a hole. He tossed me a 50-cent lighter, and I began working on the ice a bit. He left, and then he staggered back a few minutes later with a small hammer that he had brought with his supplies. That finished the job of freeing me from my icy prison. I would have felt extremely humiliated being out-survivored by my comedy relief drinking buddy, but I was so overcome with emotion about the dogman incident that I just limped to my tent, and I called it a night. I cried myself to sleep like a lady in an old romance novel. So upsetting had my experience been. After all, I thought I wasn't going to make it out. I thought the dogman was going to finish me off. The next day, Pluto didn't remember any of this, nor did he believe anything I said when I tried to tell him about Dogman and the icy day. Hey, do any of you like these adult coloring books or digital coloring books? I've heard that some people like them, so I made this one. You can print them out and color them by marker or crayon, or you can color them digitally in whatever manner it is that people do things like that. No, I did not draw these images. I'm the editor and the archivist. The price is $2.09 for over 60 images of scary dogmen and werewolves. We got werewolves chasing ladies. This guy here is running from a werewolf that already bit off half of one of his arms, it looks like. It's a crazy and fun, wild time. I guess you can judge for yourself if it's good for kids. I don't know. I don't have kids myself, so I can't really tell you. I know I would have liked it when I was young, but I don't know if that counts because I was a weird kid. Anyway, the link is in the description and the pinned comment, so check it out if you'd like to. Since it's digital, you can actually get it on Christmas Day as a last-minute present. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.